Rome, the beating heart of the ancient world. A city built on iron, ambition, and blood. For 500 years, the Roman Republic stood as a symbol of freedom. A system where no man could ever call himself king. But power has a strange gravity. It pulls great men into its orbit and then consumes them. This is the story of two giants, Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. Friends, allies, and finally, enemies. One sought glory through conquest. The other sought order through control. And between them stood the fate of Rome itself. The year is 49 BC. The Rubicon River glimmers under the winter sun. A single man stands at its edge, silent, watching the current flow. Behind him, his legions. Before him, the law of Rome, forbidding him to cross. If he takes one step forward, he declares war on his own country. If he turns back, everything he's built, his power, his legacy, dies. He whispers 4 words that will echo through history. Alia iacta est. The die is cast. From that moment, there was no republic. Only destiny. Rome, in the middle of the 1st century before Christ, was the heart of the known world. Its empire stretched from the deserts of Africa to the forests of Gaul, from Spain to the shores of Asia Minor. The roads of Rome were like veins, carrying wealth, soldiers, and ideas back to the city that called itself eternal. But behind the marble temples and golden eagles, something had begun to rot. The Republic had become too rich, too powerful, too divided. Senators fought not for the people, but for their own pockets. The poor filled the streets, fed by free grain but stripped of dignity. The army, once loyal to the state, now served only the generals who paid them. Rome was still strong on the outside, but hollow at its core. Out of this decay rose 3 men who would shape the fate of the Republic: Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar. Pompey the Great, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, was already a living legend. He had crushed rebellions, defeated the pirates that once ruled the Mediterranean, and extended Roman power to the edges of the East. To the Senate, he was the guardian of order. To the people, a hero carved in stone. He represented the old Rome, the Rome of discipline, tradition, and law. Then came Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in the city. He owned half of Rome, bought influence with gold, and turned politics into a market. He lacked the charisma of Pompey or the brilliance of Caesar, but his money made him indispensable. In Rome, even honor could be purchased. And finally, there was Gaius Julius Caesar, the youngest of the 3, ambitious, charming, and dangerous. Born into a noble but fading family, Caesar was a man of words as much as of war. He could move crowds with a speech, disarm enemies with a smile, and see opportunity where others saw only risk. He wasn't satisfied with glory, he wanted immortality. In 60 BC, these 3 men formed an alliance, the first triumvirate. Pompey brought soldiers. Crassus brought gold. Caesar brought the people. Together, they divided the Republic among themselves, believing they could share power. But power, in Rome, was never meant to be shared. Caesar was given command of Gaul, a wild land beyond the Alps. For 10 long years he fought, conquered, and killed, bringing new provinces and unimaginable wealth to Rome. He wrote his own victories into history, line by line, in the commentaries that still bear his name. His soldiers adored him. The people worshipped him. And back in Rome, Pompey began to feel something new of fear. As Caesar's fame grew, Pompey's pride began to crack. whispers spread through the city. Pompey is the man of yesterday. Caesar is the man of tomorrow. Then came disaster. Crassus, the bridge between them, marched east to Parthia, chasing his own dream of glory. He was defeated, captured, and executed. Molten gold poured down his throat, a cruel symbol of his greed. With his death, the balance of power collapsed. Only two men remained. Two former friends, now rivals. Two suns burning in the same sky, and only one could remain. The Senate turned to Pompey, calling him the defender of the Republic. They granted him extraordinary powers and demanded that Caesar disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar knew what that meant. If he obeyed, he would be stripped of everything, his titles, his honor, maybe even his life. If he refused, he would become a traitor. The friendship between Caesar and Pompey was already dead. Pompey saw Caesar as a threat to Rome. Caesar saw Pompey as a traitor to their bond. And Rome, proud, divided, trembling, stood helpless between them. One man represented the past, the other, the future. And the Republic, that ancient ideal of shared power and civic virtue, was about to be torn apart by the very men who had sworn to protect it. Two brilliant stars now blazed over Rome. But when both shine too bright, the sky itself begins to burn. Winter, 49 BC. The night was cold and silent on the northern border of Italy. A thin river shimmered under the moonlight, the Rubicon. It wasn't wide, it wasn't deep, but it divided two worlds, the provinces and Rome itself. For centuries, the law had been clear: no general could cross that river with his army. To do so meant treason. Caesar stood before the water, wrapped in his red cloak. Behind him waited the veterans of the 13th Legion, men who had followed him through 10 years of war in Gaul, who had fought in forests, swamps, and mountains, and who would follow him anywhere. But even they hesitated now. Crossing the Rubicon meant turning their swords against their own country. Caesar was silent for a long time. He looked at the water, then at the stars above. He knew exactly what this step meant. There would be no forgiveness, no turning back. Rome would either belong to him or destroy him. Finally, he whispered the words that would echo through history. The die is cast. And with that, he spurred his horse forward, the hooves breaking the reflection of the moon. The soldiers followed. The Rubicon was crossed. News reached Rome like a thunderclap. The Senate panicked. Pompey, now the protector of the Republic, was caught off guard. He had assumed Caesar would obey, lay down his command, and come back as a private man. He underestimated the ambition of the man he once called friend. Rome fell into chaos. Senators rushed to pack their belongings and flee. The streets filled with rumors: Caesar is coming. The legions are marching. People remembered the name of the 13th Legion. Men said they fought like wolves. Pompey ordered an evacuation. He led the Senate and his loyal forces out of the city toward the south, intending to regroup in Greece, where he had fleets, allies, and food supplies. Caesar entered Rome without resistance. The city, once the center of the Republic, stood quiet, abandoned by its rulers. He walked through the Forum, past the empty marble seats of the Senate, and for the first time, saw the heart of Rome without its voice. He didn't linger. He knew that seizing the city was not the victory. Pompey was the real prize. Caesar moved quickly. He marched south, capturing towns and fortresses one after another, his army advancing with precision and speed. He sent letters to Pompey, offering peace, offering negotiation. But Pompey ignored them all. He had the fleets, he had the East, he had the resources. Let Caesar have Rome, he thought, it's a city of stones. I have the world. Pompey retreated to Brundisium, the great harbor of southern Italy, and prepared to sail east. When Caesar arrived, Pompey was already loading his ships. Caesar tried to block the port, throwing up barricades and chains across the water. But Pompey managed to escape under cover of darkness. As his fleet vanished into the horizon, Caesar stood on the shore watching the torches fade, and murmured, "He takes the war from me, but I will follow him to the ends of the earth." Now Rome was his, in name. But the Republic still lived across the sea, in Pompey's hands. Caesar had a problem. He had seized the capital but had no fleet to cross the Mediterranean. So he moved swiftly to Spain, where Pompey's lieutenants commanded 7 legions. In a series of lightning campaigns, Caesar defeated them all. He said afterwards, "I am going to fight an army without a general. And then I will fight a general without an army." By the time he returned to Rome, the Senate had no choice but to recognize him as dictator. Temporary, they said, only to restore order. But Caesar used the moment to rebuild everything in his image. He paid soldiers, canceled debts, filled granaries, stabilized coinage. The people loved him even more. The Senate feared him even more. Then, in early 48 BC, he finally gathered a fleet, small, fragile, but enough to chase Pompey. The winter seas were rough, but Caesar didn't care. He told his men, "We are sailing toward a man who flees from us. What storm can we fear more than that?" They landed in Greece, but the campaign went wrong from the start. Pompey was ready. He had a larger army, more food, and total control of the sea. Caesar was trapped on foreign soil, cut off from supplies, outnumbered almost 2-1. He built fortifications around Pompey's camp, hoping to starve him out. Pompey countered with his own walls. For months, the two armies circled each other, building, digging, waiting. A siege of nerves rather than swords. Then came Dyrrhachium. Pompey broke through Caesar's lines in a massive assault. Thousands of Caesar's men fell. It was his first true defeat. His army nearly collapsed. That night, under the pale moon, Caesar walked among the wounded and the dead. He said nothing, only touched the hands of the men who still breathed. He knew Pompey should have pursued, should have ended him there. But Pompey, cautious and proud, believed Caesar was finished. He stayed in his camp, waiting for the perfect moment. And that hesitation would cost him everything. Caesar gathered his remaining troops and spoke plainly. "We have lost a battle, yes. But Pompey has lost his chance. He will never find courage enough to fight me again. And that means this war is still ours." He led his men away from Dyrrhachium, through dust and hunger, marching deeper into Greece instead of retreating to safety. It was madness, some said. Genius, others whispered. His destination was Thessaly, fertile land, open fields, the perfect place for one last gamble. There, he would regroup, feed his men, and face Pompey once more. Not with walls or traps, but in open battle. Pompey followed. He could not resist the chase. His senators begged him to wait, to let Caesar starve. But Pompey's pride, once his greatest strength, became his undoing. He wanted the glory of the final blow, the triumph of ending Caesar in front of all Rome. And so both men marched toward the same field. one driven by ambition, the other by pride. The Republic itself followed behind them, like a dying god watching its last sunrise. By the summer of 48 BC, the two greatest generals of Rome would face each other at last. Caesar and Pompey. Brothers once, now enemies forever. Meeting on the plains of Thessaly to decide who would rule the world. The sun rose over the plains of Thessaly, golden and soft, masking the blood that would soon soak its soil. After Dyrrhachium, Caesar's army was starving, exhausted, and battered. They had lost men, supplies, and faith, yet not their commander. To his soldiers, Caesar was more than a general, he was destiny itself. He led them through desolation, across burned fields and enemy towns that refused them food. Each day was a struggle, but each night, his presence restored belief. Pompey, meanwhile, followed at a measured pace. He still had the advantage, superior numbers, cavalry, and the full blessing of the Senate. His camps overflowed with nobles, senators, and rich young men who dreamed of glory. They called themselves the true Rome. To them, Caesar was a traitor, a barbarian general who had to be destroyed before he could crown himself king. But Pompey was no longer the man of action he once was. He hesitated, calculating every step, waiting for Caesar to make a mistake. His allies grew impatient. "Strike him now," they urged. "His army is starving. End this, and return Rome to the Republic." Pompey nodded, but he still delayed. He feared Caesar's cunning more than he trusted his own strength. Caesar moved through the fertile lands of Thessaly, gathering what food and recruits he could. At Apollonia, he found loyal allies and restocked his supplies. His men built a new camp near the small town of Pharsalus. Pompey soon arrived as well, taking position on higher ground overlooking Caesar's valley camp. The two armies were now within sight of each other. Each morning, Caesar would march his men out in formation, ready for battle. Each morning, Pompey would mirror him, but never descend. The soldiers grew restless. The tension in the air was like the stillness before a storm. For days, they faced one another across the plain. 30,000 men under Caesar's eagle, 40,000 under Pompey's. The Republic itself seemed frozen between them. Then came the day Pompey could wait no longer. The senators in his camp mocked him, saying he feared the very man he claimed to protect Rome from. Enraged, Pompey agreed to give battle. He drew up his legions at the foot of the hill, their lines gleaming beneath the summer sun. He placed his vast cavalry, 7,000 strong, on his left wing, under his own command. Their task was simple: crush Caesar's smaller force of 1,000 horsemen. Then wheel around and strike at the flank and rear. The plan was perfect, in theory. Caesar watched from the plain below. He could see the glittering mass of cavalry waiting to sweep his army away. He smiled faintly. He had already seen through Pompey's plan. From among his legions, he quietly assembled a reserve of 3,000 men. Hand-picked veterans who would fight not as infantry but as spearmen. He told them, when their cavalry charges, do not throw your pilot. Hold them like lances. Strike for the face. Fear no one who fights on horseback. The morning of the battle was clear and windless. Two armies faced each other in silence, banners fluttering. Then Caesar raised his hand. The trumpets sounded. His legions advanced. Normally, Roman battles began with a sudden rush. But Caesar's men climbed steadily, shields raised, conserving their strength. When they were halfway up the slope, they halted to catch their breath, then surged forward again, hurling their javelins and crashing into Pompey's first line. Steel met steel. The sound of impact rolled across the field like thunder. For a moment, neither side gave way. Pompey's men held firm until the signal came. His cavalry on the left wing galloped forward, a wall of horses and dust charging toward Caesar's right flank. They crashed into Caesar's outnumbered horsemen, driving them back. Pompey's senators cheered. Victory seemed near. Then Caesar gave a quiet command. His hidden reserve, the 3,000 spearmen, stepped forward as one. Locked together like a living wall, they thrust upward, their long pilaw striking at horses and faces. Pompey's cavalry, expecting an easy victory, broke in confusion. Within minutes, panic spread. The great cavalry wing, the pride of Pompey's army, collapsed and fled. Caesar saw his chance. He ordered his reserve not to chase, but to turn inward and attack the exposed flank of Pompey's infantry. At the same time, his third line, fresh and untouched, surged forward into the center. Pompey's soldiers, attacked from front and side, began to falter. Their shield wall cracked. Then, suddenly, it broke. What began as a retreat turned into a rout. The senators who had followed Pompey fled back to the camp, throwing away their armor, screaming that the gods had abandoned them. Caesar's men stormed through the gates. The battle was over. Pompey, once the great, stood in disbelief as his world collapsed. He had fought for the Republic, but the Republic had chosen a new master. As night fell, he rode away from the battlefield with only a few companions, the torches of Caesar's legions burning behind him like a river of fire. On the plains of Pharsalus, the Republic of Rome died, not with a speech in the Senate, but beneath the boots of Caesar's soldiers. What rose in its place would change history forever. After the defeat at Pharsalus, Pompey the Great, once the most celebrated general in the Roman world, was now a fugitive. On the plains of Thessaly, he had left behind his power, his glory, and his dream of saving the Republic he had sworn to protect. With only a handful of loyal companions, he rode into the night, following dusty roads, the sound of Caesar's victory still echoing behind him like a curse that would not fade. Pompey's destination was Egypt, the rich, young kingdom he had once helped restore to its throne. Years earlier, he had intervened in Egyptian civil wars, securing the rule of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Now, he hoped that old favors would be remembered. He believed that in Alexandria, the great city of the pharaohs, he would find safety and perhaps a chance to rebuild. But on the road, grim news reached him. Many of his allies had surrendered to Caesar. Those who had once called him the defender of the Republic now bent the knee to the conqueror. Pompey said nothing. Perhaps he finally understood Rome was never loyal to men, only to power. When he reached the port of Pelusium, he sent a letter to the Egyptian king, asking for permission to come ashore. The king, Ptolemy XIII, was only 12 years old. The real power lay in the hands of his regents, ambitious courtiers terrified that Caesar would invade Egypt if they gave Pompey refuge. After long discussion, they chose what they believed was the safer path. Kill Pompey before Caesar arrives, and offer his head as a gift to the new master of Rome. That morning, Pompey stood on the deck of his ship and saw the Egyptian coast in the distance. The land of sunlight and sand, the land he had once saved. A small boat approached from the shore, carrying several men. They greeted him warmly, explaining that the king wished to receive him privately to avoid offending Caesar. Pompey hesitated, then nodded. He trusted too easily. He stepped into the small boat, taking only one slave and a lifelong friend with him. As they rowed closer to the shore, Pompey adjusted his cloak, smoothed his beard, and tried to hold on to the last dignity of a great man brought low. One of the men rowing the boat, Lucius Septimius, had once served under Pompey in the east. Pompey recognized him and smiled, ready to speak a kind word. But before he could open his mouth, Septimius drove a dagger into his chest. There was no cry, no struggle. Pompey fell silently, his eyes wide, staring at the crimson sea beneath him. The boat continued toward shore, carrying the body of the man who had once been called Pompey the Great. When Caesar arrived in Egypt a few days later, the Egyptians greeted him with a gift, a wooden box. Inside was Pompey's severed head, preserved in salt. The officer presenting it smiled proudly and said, "Behold, Caesar, your enemy is dead. Egypt is now your ally." Caesar looked into the box and said nothing. Then he turned away. Tears filled his eyes. He ordered Pompey's body to be found and buried with full honors. At the funeral, Caesar spoke softly to his companions. "He was once the greatest among us. And I am left with victory and no friend." It was the bitterest triumph of his life. He had conquered the world, yet lost the only man who had ever truly understood him. With Pompey's death, the last heartbeat of the Roman Republic faded into silence. From that moment on, Caesar would walk a different path. The path of absolute power, unchallenged glory, and a loneliness that no emperor after him would ever escape. When Caesar returned to Rome, the city welcomed him as a hero. Crowds lined the streets, throwing flowers, chanting his name. The Senate, terrified but obedient, granted him every honor they could invent. Dictator for a year, then for 5 years, and finally, for life. The Republic was gone in everything but name. He had done what no Roman had ever dared. He had broken the old order, the web of laws and traditions that had bound men for centuries, and replaced it with himself. Caesar had become the law. He pardoned his enemies. He called back senators who had fled, even men who had fought against him at Pharsalus. Among them was Marcus Junius Brutus, the son of a woman Caesar had once loved. He welcomed Brutus with open arms, calling him my son. And the people whispered that the dictator had forgiven the Republic itself. Caesar's reforms came quickly. He stabilized the currency, rebuilt temples, rewarded veterans, and granted citizenship to entire provinces. He planned new colonies, new roads, even a new calendar, the Julian calendar, which still marks the passage of our days today. But the more he built, the more the Senate grew restless. Every act of kindness only reminded them how powerless they had become. Every statue of Caesar replaced a statue of the Republic. Every cheer from the crowd sounded like a funeral bell for freedom. He was no longer a man, he was a living god. People knelt when he passed. Coins bore his image. His birthday became a national holiday. And above the Capitol, a new inscription appeared. To Caesar, the eternal ruler. Yet, for all his glory, Caesar was alone. Pompey was gone. His old rivals were dead or humbled. Even his allies were shadows of the men they had been. Victory had given him everything, and taken everyone. At night, he would walk through the marble halls of his palace, past the maps of his conquests and the trophies of his victories. and he would stop before a small bust of Alexander the Great. He would stare at it for a long time, then whisper to himself, "You died at 33. I am older, and yet, what have I left to conquer?" He had climbed higher than any Roman before him. But the air at that height was thin, cold, empty. The cheers of the crowd no longer moved him. The Senate's praise no longer mattered. And deep inside, Caesar began to sense that every triumph brings its shadow. The whispers began quietly in the Senate halls, behind marble pillars. That he had grown too powerful. That he meant to make himself king. The word rex, king, had been cursed in Rome since the fall of its first monarchy. For centuries, Romans had vowed never again to kneel before one man. Now, they knelt every day. Caesar, in his pride, ignored the danger. He believed the Senate adored him. He believed his mercy had bought their loyalty. He believed he could rule Rome forever. But mercy is forgotten faster than fear. And in the shadows of the Republic, men were already sharpening their knives. The morning of March 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March, dawned over Rome calm and golden. The city stirred awake beneath a thin mist, unaware that before the sun would set, history itself would bleed. Caesar woke early. He had not slept well. Strange dreams had plagued the night, visions of his statue bleeding from many wounds, and the voice of his wife, Calpurnia, begging him not to go to the Senate. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. It was rare for March. Some said it was the gods whispering. Caesar's friends came to escort him to the Curia, the meeting hall of the Senate. He hesitated. Calpurnia pleaded once more, clutching his hand, tears in her eyes. "My husband, today feels cursed. Do not go." For a moment, the conqueror of the world almost listened. He agreed to postpone the session. But then came Decimus Brutus, one of the conspirators, calm, persuasive, loyal in appearance. He smiled and said softly, "Caesar, the senators await you to honor your greatness. If you fail to appear, they will think you mock them. Do not give them reason to doubt your courage." The word stung Caesar's pride more than any blade could. He rose, straightened his crimson robe, and said, "Caesar does not hide from the Senate." His litter carried him through the forum, past temples and statues, many of them his own. Citizens watched in silence. Some bowed. Some whispered. A few turned away. At the Curia of Pompey, the very building named for his fallen friend, the senators waited. More than 60 of them, wrapped in white togas, their faces calm, their hearts beating like war drums. Among them stood Cassius, Casca, and Brutus, men who loved the Republic more than they feared damnation. They believed this act, however dark, would save Rome from tyranny. When Caesar entered, the senators rose to greet him. He smiled, proud and unguarded. He took his seat. One by one, they approached with petitions, a rehearsed excuse to draw close. Then, suddenly, Casca struck first. A short blade flashed beneath his toga, slashing Caesar's shoulder. Caesar jerked back, stunned. "What is this?" he shouted. Another blow came from behind, then another, and another. Steel hissed and bit. Dozens of daggers pierced the air. The room filled with the sound of chaos, sandals scraping marble, robes tearing, men grunting, blood hitting stone. Caesar tried to defend himself, but there were too many. Then he saw a familiar face, Brutus, his son, the one he had trusted above all others. Their eyes met. In that frozen moment, time seemed to stop. He whispered, "Et tu, Brute? You too, Brutus?" And with that, he no longer resisted. He pulled his robe over his head and fell at the base of Pompey's statue, a cruel symbol that the Republic had come full circle. The conqueror of Gaul, the ruler of Rome, the man who had crossed the Rubicon and rewritten history, now lay dead in a pool of his own blood, beneath the shadow of the man he once called brother. When news spread through the streets, the city froze in disbelief. Some rejoiced, crying freedom. Others wept, crying treason. But above all, there was silence. The stunned silence of a world that had lost its center. Caesar was gone, and with him, the last breath of the Roman Republic. The senators fled to Curia, their hands stained with the blood of the man they claimed to save Rome from. But they did not understand what they had unleashed. Within days, the streets ran red again. Not with tyranny, but with vengeance. The people mourned their fallen god. The republic they thought they had saved began to tear itself apart once more. And from the ashes of that chaos would rise a new Rome. An empire not of freedom, but of emperors.